Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this IAgrE lunchtime lecture. My name's Steve Constable. I'm the current president, and I have the pleasure of chairing this meeting this afternoon. Can I welcome Richard Robinson, who is an IAgrE Honorary Fellow and past president. Richard currently sits on our awards panel and is the trustee of the Douglas Bomford Trust, with special responsibility for the Arkwright scholars. In 1977, Richard started a company called Autoglide Equipment Limited, which manufactures kit for many manufacturers and importers, and has proven a specialist and successful business cutting across several industries. Today, Richard will discuss a topic that's really close to my heart: ideas. Some ideas that didn't get going and some that are still going strong. As with previous lunchtime lectures, you'll all be muted, so if you'd like to ask a question, pop it into the chat at the bottom there. And at the end, we will unmute you so you can ask that question in person. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to hand over to Richard. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much. We've got a slight technical problem in that you won't be able to view me whilst I'm talking and presenting at the same time, which is probably a bonus anyway. So I will try and share my content now. Well, my father was a farmer. He was a tenant of the Queen, and he had some very indifferent land. So after he died, I took the sound decision not to become a farmer. When I was 12, I started baling on the farm. That was when I was sort of allowed to drive a tractor seriously. And then when I was 14, this is a sort of representation of me sat on our Massey 780 special combine. And we had 8-foot cut combines that were just fitted through 10-foot gateways when you folded the spout round the side. So that dates me a bit, I'm afraid. It's one of the reasons why I think Massey combines have only just reappeared as a viable combine, because we had 2 combines and spent most of the time repairing one or the other, which is why I got to drive them, since our foreman was good at repairing them and I could manage to drive them till something broke. It was important, I think, that my father had some very firm views on how to farm, and those fields that we farmed, we weren't allowed to put a rubber tire in the field between harvest and spraying, or more or less that. So the ploughing was done with a crawler. The cultivation was done with a crawler. The drilling was usually done with a crawler, but sometimes a tractor with cage wheels on. And we never had puddles nor the wet problems that people have got. But of course, we stayed off some fields, and we definitely spent very little time towing tractors in and out of fields and that sort of thing. Anything that went on in the field was done with a horse and cart if necessary. That dates me even more, doesn't it? So anyway, that was my start on agricultural engineering, which was looking after the combine. And after I left school, I went to university to do metallurgy. Didn't like that after the first year, wanted to change to engineering. My maths wasn't good enough. So I rocked up at New Holland and asked them for a job. Now, they didn't have any engineering trainees at the time. They made a position for me, which was very kind of them. And as a result, my boss at the time, a chap named John Patterson, suggested that I join this new institution, the Institution of Agricultural Engineers. And that dates my memory of the institution quite a lot. And I'm showing a picture here of the Deutz Intrac. New Holland, I don't know whether it was in their wisdom, my wisdom, or just by luck, but they sent me to an Institution of Agriculture Engineers conference in London, where Dr. Gago from Deutz was doing a presentation which included the Intrac. And I wrote a report about it. I have no idea what I put in the report. I can't remember any of the other things, but these were the days when people like Ted Manby were around and Claude Colpin, the sort of stalwarts of the institution, and Silso. And I'm sure that we all thought that the system tractor was the tractor of the future. These days, there's a bit of evidence that that's working, but the Intrac, of course, is no longer, even though they gradually improved it. And I never thought that I would ever get involved with Deutz tractors. I thought they were funny foreign things that I didn't really know anything about. So that was my introduction to our wonderful institution. My progress through New Holland mainly involved not being in England for many Christmases and being sent all over the place. And after 8 years, I then thought I could do with a change and went to work for Wattveer in Ivy Bridge in Devon. They were the Far machinery importers, so we had Far haymaking machinery, Far combines. In fact, at one time at the Royal Show, every stand that had machinery on it had got some components or some elements supplied by Wattveer in one form or another. It could have been PTO shafts or all sorts of strange things. So, well, I'm going forwards now. Well, Wattveer, with the Far connection, decided to start selling Deutz tractors. These were times when there were very few four-wheel drive tractors around in the country. Obviously, there was county, but tractors, you know, like a Ford 5000 four-wheel drive, only existed in conversion form. And Deutz had actual factory-built four-wheel drive tractors. And one of the problems was that being developed in Germany, they had sort of rough cabs. These were initially pre-Q cab days, and they didn't have pickup hitches at all. France made some pickup hitches, which the company bought, and the cabs were sourced from people like Secura and Fritzmeier, but they didn't really suit the operation in England anyway. So I found this picture of, I think it's a Deutz 6806 or 7206, don't know which. Same tractor, basically, just slight tweak on the injection pump. But Wattveer decided that they would source cabs in the UK, and we went to a company called RSM, Retford Sheet Metal, and their designer, a chap called Les Kepke. Now, Les Kepke was a Canadian. He came to England via Massey Ferguson to work at Kilmarnock. He was their combine man, and I'm sure Les is no longer around, but I'm sure he'd be embarrassed to say that he was the designer of the 400 and 500 combines. They didn't like English conditions that well. And of course, for me, that was a follow-on from my Massey 780 days. So we did talk combines a lot, but we also spent a lot of time trying to make quiet cabs that were safe, that fitted the range of tractors we had. And to his eternal credit, the RSM cabs went very well. This one here, the tractor and cab, can't quite work out the registration, but we're talking 45, 50 years old, offered for sale with an RSM cab on it. And the paintwork isn't too bad. So we must have got that right by a process of attrition, really, because we kept complaining at them for cab finish and so on. And the hitch is my very first design of pickup hitch, which was made in Westbury by a local firm. You can't really see too much there, but you can see it's got a drawbar. So the drawbar can be used to pick things up. And if you push the drawbar all the way in, the drawbar stays in place and the hook comes down below it. So you've got a working pickup hitch. So that was the start of my enthusiasm for pickup hitches. Subsequently, I'll just move on here. I left Watbeer and came up with a slightly improved version of the pickup hitch, which is still being supplied to Watbeer for the Deutsch tractors, and this is a newer one. The hook in this picture, which again you can't see, but there we are, you know what a hook looks like. That was the biggest forging that Kimber Die and Tool ever did. Kimbers were people who were known particularly for making combine the fingers on combines, which were double fingers. So unlike a finger bar mower, each finger being separate, the combine fingers were made as a pair. And Kimber had got, but they'd never show you how he did it, the most economical way of turning the smallest amount of metal into a pair of double fingers that were strong, reliable. And for many years, I think they had the lion's share of the combine finger market. Anyway, our hook was forged in their factory in Dudley. For those of you nautical persuasion, the boardroom table had an edge all the way around it to stop things falling off. Now, it wasn't because the boardroom table was at sea, but when the big hammer was working, the vibration shook the table so much that anything on the table would fall off unless it had fiddles to hold it on. Now, in the middle of the factory, there was a cottage, and a delightful lady lived in this cottage. She had been there, I don't know if she was born there, but she certainly spent most of her life there. And about once a week, chaps from the factory would go and reposition the tiles on her roof as they slid down. Sorry, not tiles. Yes, the tiles on her roof. That added a bit of entertainment when we went there. And they'd offered her the chance of moving, but she said no, she was used to it. She liked it and didn't want to move ever. So there you go. So this started my journey in pickup hitches. And I'd now left Watbeer, and the same people making the hitches made them, and we formed a sort of joint operation. I designed them, they made them, and we looked for other customers. One of the other customers turned out to be Mercedes Unimogs. It's a bit tricky because, of course, the Unimog suspension was never really designed to have heavy trailers hung on the back of it. They really intended you to pull it from somewhere up near where the top link point is with a Rocklinger hitch and a modest nose weight, whereas we wanted to pull from lower down with a significant nose weight. Now, our first hitch for the Unimog was based a bit like the one on the previous slide. And it did suffer a bit of wear, and you've got the problem, many people would know about it, where trailers come off the hook sometimes, either a bit through wear or simply because the hitch hasn't been fully closed. there was a horrible accident which occurred with one of our hitches on a Unimog. As it turns out, the operator of the Unimog had spent nothing on maintenance, and if he'd spent about £150, he could have put the hitch in good condition. But as it was badly worn, really not fit for purpose. The rest of the Unimog was equally bad. I think the brakes only worked on one wheel of one axle. Some wheel studs were broken and missing, and so on. So it was not really how things should have been. And when I last saw him, he was invited to bring a toothbrush with him when he next went to court. So I got to thinking about hitch designs. And just before we went away on holiday one year, Ford came up with a problem that they've got a version of the 3000, I can't remember what it was called now, but it was still basically the same old tractor with comparatively small wheels, and their standard Ford hitch was used up too much ground clearance. So I started to think of a new hitch which was slimmer than anybody else's before. That gave me the thought of this hitch which you see on the Unimog here. You see it's got two guide plates and a pin, so it's a bit like a forage harvester hitch. I claim no originality from that point of view. But those guide plates, we thought, oh, well, that could be called an auto guide hitch, because on the Unimog, you couldn't see what you're doing anyway, and you could back up, and with a bit of luck, the trailer eye would center itself on the ring seat at the bottom of the picture. You lift the hitch up, the ring seat would pass over the pin, and that would safely lock the trailer in place. Thanks to a Unimog demonstration, where a Unimog towing a slurry tanker and an Arctic, normal Arctic unit with a tanker on the back met on a humpback bridge in Wales. The problem with the humpback bridge was neither of them saw each other, and that didn't help. When they did meet, there wasn't room for both of them to get over the bridge together. So they each went through the bridge parapet on either side. The Arctic unit finished up in the river, broken away from its trailer. The Unimog finished up also in the river, upside down, with the slurry tanker on top of it. The drawbar bent in the U shape and still attached to the pickup hitch. So I thought I was onto a winner with the Auto Guide pickup hitch, and of course we've maintained that name from then till now as an idea for improving hitch safety. So the next thing to do is to get the hitch, in fact the one in this picture is fully approved, but get my hitch design tested, because in those days it was all a bit flaky. You did your own tests. So I went on to Silso and they said, well, no, it's not a pickup hitch hook as we know it, so we can't test it. Mercedes at that time wanted hitches for MB tracks as well as Unimogs. And they said, well, the Berlin walls come down. DEKRA in Dresden would like to do some testing. Why not go over there and talk to them? So I got my flight to Dresden, and the DEKRA testing operation was right next to the airport. And it was where the Russians used to test all their aircraft, do all the fatigue testing on wings and bits to see what broke off. They're incredibly helpful, particularly as I was given a tour of Dresden and saw what a number of our chaps did when they stopped by with Lancasters towards the end of the war. So as well as discussing plans on how the test would be done. We had a quick tour of Dresden in the morning. I had a tour of the DECRA facility, which was full of, I don't know how a hydraulic cylinder can look Russian, but they obviously were Russian when you looked at them. Then I walked from DECRA testing into the airport, and it seemed very quiet in the airport. And they said, "Oh, good morning, Mr. Robinson." I thought, "Oh, that's must be something to do with my DECRA connection." But in fact, there were only two of us on the whole flight back to London, so it wasn't too big a jump of imagination to think who I might be. Unfortunately, the Mercedes distributors, well, the pickup hitch that you see here, we produced various versions of it because in what had been East Germany, they did use pickup hitches like ours, which was why DECRA were also enthusiastic about what we were doing. And that got us, we actually did some work with DECRA on other jobs, and we were the first English company to work with them. It's all a bit tricky. They didn't speak any English, and my German has been known to have gaping holes in it. But anyway, there we go. We produced the first fully tested and approved pickup hitch for Unimogs and MB tracks, and supplied a lot to Mercedes over the years. Don't do it anymore. They changed the complete design of the Unimog. We offered to make lots of bits for them, but on an exclusive basis. I didn't want to share our business with anybody else, as we had done effectively with the hitches. That went every which way. So we do make a few hitches now, but only really for forage harvesters and mainly John Deere. So now we're talking about projects that might have gone well, but didn't. This is the mower mower. In fact, Andrew Landers, who is listening, will recall this mower. Frank Moore, who had been the sales director at Howard Rotavator when he retired. Interestingly, I think his retirement present from the AEA was a set of taps and dies, which indicates a lot, really. Frank came up with the idea of the mower mower, and this is our take on the mower mower. So it features a V-twin Briggs & Stratton engine driving a transaxle and hydraulic pumps. The hydraulic pumps, one for the cylinder mower or rotary mower, and one to tip the hopper. Now, it looks a bit weird, and Frank had a patent on this. And the only way I can describe it, imagine if you're sat in a wheelchair and you're propelling yourself along slightly sticky ground. So to get your wheelchair to go, you push down on the front of the wheels to move forward. And in doing so, you get a weight transfer. And that's exactly what happened with the mower mower. So the engine and the transaxle pivoted with the mower in front. So even on wet grass, the torque from propelling itself forwards tried to lift up the front of the mower. If you just sort of close your eyes and picture somebody in a wheelchair, you'll understand what I mean. And this was a great way of getting the mower to perform up and down slopes where a normal wheeled mower pushing cylinders along, particularly with a big grass box full of grass, would suffer traction issues. Now, we persisted with this mower for a while, but realized that those two front wheels, and we'll see them again now, because they got so much weight transfer from the mower, actually left two ruts in the grass. So first of all, we tried to cover that up by putting those multiple wheels on the back, as the back wheel, to cover up the width. But when you finish mowing with one, particularly in damp conditions, there were two darker green lines in the grass as the grass was pushed down, cut to obviously a different height. And so we were left with a beautiful lawn, but with ruts in it. And we just couldn't get that problem solved in such a way as to make it viable. So this is an example of a product where it got an awful lot going for it. Frank developed all kinds of attachments for it that would do wonderful things, and on dryish ground, well-drained lawns, it was wonderful. In fact, he supplied one to the Commonwealth War Graves that was cutting the grass at the cemetery at Arnhem. But nevertheless, we just couldn't get it adopted by people that really wanted the finest grass. Even though with that hopper, which you see there, that when you lifted the mower up and then you tipped the hopper forwards, you could tip it into a trailer. So it picked up the grass beautifully. It did everything really well. It was quiet, wonderful. But sadly, that's one of the ones that, despite a lot of investment, never got anywhere. And here's another one. Now, this is what we call the star strimmer. The idea was, and still is if you think about it, there's lots of fencing, particularly around racecourses, where they have to strim round posts. And the star strimmer, with its three rotors in the star formation, as they touched the post, each one would index round like a simple three-tooth cogwheel and strim the grass around the post. What we learned from this was that we now knew how to make this kind of mower, but we couldn't find anybody willing to pay for the complication that would have given us a reliable and safe machine. The one thing that we particularly wanted was posts that we're going to use a star strimmer on would have a plastic sleeve around them near the bottom, so that the strimmer line, because we used that, or blades if we were using blades on it, the blades didn't extend outside that yellow cover, but nevertheless the yellow cover would keep rubbing against the post and mark it or wear it away, or if it was a metal post, would remove galvanizing and so on. So here we are, yet another product where AutoGuide as a company spent a lot of effort learning a lot, but failed to capitalize on what we'd learned. So there we go, another one that didn't quite make it. But if somebody came along with a budget, and I think now we could design you a machine that would do that job really well and be a great improvement. Certainly much better than holding a strimmer going around miles of fencing. So if you currently look in our workshop, and I've got nothing much to do with this now, this was my take on a piling rig. It used a telescopic mast and would drill down to about 18 meters deep. And that was used for piling repairs to houses around London. The newer version, this came out of our workshop a couple of years ago, and it's obviously a conversion of an excavator, which proved to be better than our first one. which was building the whole thing from scratch, using somebody else's work as a good basis. So I say, if you go to the workshop at the moment, you'll see, I think it's a 24-ton excavator having a similar heart transplant. And this brings us on to augers and one of AutoGuide's mainstay products. We started importing hydraulic quick couplers from an American sort of export house, and they thought we were doing a reasonable job with that, mainly because we were supplying Manitou with lots and lots of them for a little while. So they thought we were good eggs, good people to do business with. So they had taken on hydraulic augers. So we thought we could buy augers from America and start selling those. The problem was we didn't have an awful lot of money at the time. We do, not necessarily now, but we never had what people wanted in stock. And so we were looking around for differing customers and different approaches. So I then decided, well, what we could do is use the same amount of money we might have used to invest in stock from America and invest in our own designs. So we, amongst other things, we toddled off to our last ever Smithfield show. And at that show met a great guy, sadly no longer with us, Mike Marsh, from what was in those days SOM gearboxes and then Comer gearboxes. And he said, well, to make decent auger drives, you need a motor. Yes, well, you have to get that way you can, but buy your gearboxes from us. And that's what we started doing when we bought their planetary gearboxes. One of the big bits of interest was British Telecom at that time used to buy their trucks from King Trailers, and King Trailers had a truck with an auger drive on it, and the auger drive was made for them by Hamworthy Hydraulics down in Poole. So it was a planetary gearbox, so we ticked that box. That used a gear motor to drive the auger drive, and a massive great oil tank and separate pump and tank to drive the auger. To get the torque that BT wanted, which at that time I think was 8,000 Newton meters or 8 kilonewton meters, you needed a combination of a fairly big motor, reasonably big gearbox, and about 120 litres a minute of oil flow. Now, to get 120 litres a minute of oil to the end of a crane boom, you need big pipes. And this brings us to the bane of putting augers on cranes. And we'll just look at an auger on a crane. It's pressure drop in hydraulic hoses. Like the same thing happens in water pipes, obviously. But you can imagine that the pump is located somewhere around about the engine gearbox, and the poor old oil's got to go all the way along there through valves and swivels and connectors and everything else, all the way up to the end of the boom, and then go all the way back again. And a bit like human beings in a crowd, it gets tired of all that pushing and shoving. It hasn't really got as much energy as you'd like. So the BT specification was 8,000 Newton meters, I said, and 60 RPM. Now, we thought we were doing quite well making augers. We, in fact, at that time were supplying JCB with their auger equipment, with a fixed displacement hydraulic motor on a gearbox, and The fixed displacement motors would be a Girola motor. So just two pipe connection worked really well. We then thought we would get a bit ambitious, and we supplied some units to put up the gantries for the Euro tunnel, our end of the Channel Tunnel. And that worked all right for a couple of days, and then the motor blew up. Got another motor and looked at it, and then discovered something which I should really have known, given my experience, I suppose, but didn't, was that I'd used the wrong kind of hydraulic motor. Luckily managed to source what we needed from Lindy as it happened, and popped the Lindy motor on it, and it went to work, and therefore thereafter was reliable. So in doing so, though, I contacted a little firm called Volvo, or I don't know, it was Volvo at the time, or Voac, and they produced hydraulic motors. This particular motor had been designed as a fuel pump for a jet engine, variable displacement fuel pump. They turned it into a hydraulic motor, and a lovely guy called John Dunn, who was their sales rep, called on us and said, well, we got this motor, and we think that perhaps you would like to use it. Well, to cut long story short, we used this motor on our first auger drive. We were down in Kent, and we actually broke the end off the crane that we detached it to, and the fleet engineer said, that's the best auger drive I've seen in years. Most of them won't pull the skin off a rice pudding. So lo and behold, we then made a bigger version of that. And you see this on the Hiab demonstration lorry in Sweden, which was the start of our higher torque units. And since then, we've used this same motor in so many different applications. It goes into our piling rigs, it goes into our very high torque torque heads for driving in screw anchors, and led us really to also build the biggest torque calibration rig in the country, in fact the only one. So we calibrate everybody's torque heads, which is really interesting because we can then see how our opposition are doing and see whether they're any good or not. And of course, we find good reason to criticize them. But since all that came about from really two sales reps or two salesmen who helped us a lot in all our day. So that product is one that's got legs and still going strong. This one, I won't talk over it while it's working, otherwise nothing will happen, but I hope it works. Well, that's our take on how to go fencing or push things into the ground. So it's our vibrating post drivers. We have a mini, midi, and a maxi now. Generally matter on excavators, but all sorts of things with a bit of hydraulic supply. We can put fence posts in the ground. The great thing is that as well as putting them in, we can take them back out again, which makes it very nice to demonstrate at shows. The tricky bit and this fortunately seems to have escaped some of the people who tried to copy it, is that we can manage to make the clamping and the vibration all work on just a single double acting service. So the first action, as you apply power, the clamp closes on the post, and then the vibration starts, and the motor can freewheel down after you stop. So that preserves the motors. Vibrating post in the ground, we claim and prove most of the time that it's more accurate and certainly safer than a falling weight type post driver. And so we've now got post drivers as an important part of our product range, work really well. We did need high strength steels to make them, and it was only really the fact you get laser cut material accurate enough to make them easy enough to make. Before that, there was a lot of machining involved, and you could never get the price down to a point where it was reasonable. So on performance terms, our units compete with other units costing 4 or 5 times as much. It's quite encouraging. Now, this is my last point, really. Back in the day when I joined the institution, I never ever thought that I would get the job of president. That was so far from my mind. Nor did I think I'd become a member of the Douglas Bomford Trust. This is myself, Alan, at the Harper Adams presentation. Rodri Williams on this, wearing the red tie on the right-hand side. He's an Arkwright scholar, and I look after the Arkwright scholarships for the Trust. I knew nothing about Arkwright scholarships. It's a fantastic way of getting school pupils between GCSEs and A-levels interested in engineering. The Trust sponsors now 4 scholars each year. Well, last year was our anniversary year, so 50 years of the Trust. We did 4 then, and they kindly let me have 4 more for this year. And I met them all in London a couple of weeks ago, and we'll be showing them a bit of real agricultural engineering over the next year in an effort to keep them focused on our wonderful industry. So it's full circle, really, because I've gone from being an apprentice or a trainee at New Holland to actually giving something back to these young people. And I say Rodri, he's an Arkwright scholar. He subsequently got a class scholarship. He now seems to be working at Class and at Harper, but he's a great supporter of our institution and our industry. There we go. I'll stop sharing now.
Okay, Richard. Yeah, thank you very much. That was really interesting.
We still haven't got you back on camera, Richard. I don't know if you can change your camera setting again.
Okay, I'm working on it. How is that?
No.
How is that?
Oh,
yes,
perfect.
yes, back. Yeah. So moving on. I don't know if there's any questions in chat. Sorry, I'm just trying to get in there. So, Alan, you've got a few comments on there. Would you like to ask a question?
Gladly. Always like to ask Richard a question as the Trust Secretary. But leaving aside my Douglas Bomford Trust hat and putting my old health and safety hat on, Richard. Yeah, you've got a great list of glorious failures there and other things, and some wonderful contributions as well. I mean, the hitch and working on the cabs and all of that. Yeah, I mean, I put in the chat there the first thing, don't beat yourself up about the worn hooks, because sadly that's still one of the most common failings when hooks and hitches when you do the police do checks or whatever. It really is still way up there, and there's no excuse for that, as you would rightly say. I did make an observation about you driving tractors underage. We weren't not underage, you were overage, but although the regulations perhaps didn't apply way back then. So we'll gloss over that. And William Waddlove made a comment in there. Yeah, we've all been there and done it, so no, we won't go there. Yeah, the anecdote about the foundry, I love that one. You can just imagine the vibration, that poor lady as well. I just wonder where that would fit these days with our noise and vibration regulations at work. Yeah, I can imagine the inspector coming along and raising an eyebrow at that in these days. But there we are. We've moved on from foundries of old, I think. But that was a lovely. I mean, just over to see some pictures of that would have been great. But anyway, to be positive, the Star Strimmer. I've spent the last 10 years working with local authorities, trying to save their guys operating strimmers, on the middle of dual carriageways and motorways and so on, always at risk, even when you've got lane closures. And I think there is a machine out in Ireland, made in Ireland, using something similar to go around the guardrails in the central reservation. I just wondered if there was any overlap there, and then that then led me to think about patents. And as a company, have you gone down that route, made any money out of patents that you I'm just thinking of other sources of income for you, Richard, really. But yeah, it's an expensive process, I assume, for small businesses and startups to go down the patent route. I've got no idea how much that sort of costs, really. So yeah, there's a lot wrapped up in there, Richard. I hope you can respond to that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alan. The first thing is we have in our time occasionally invested in the patent application. The only ones we've made any money out of, and not very much at that, when we sold them to somebody else. Two of our products, really, there's the mower and the mulching mower, which we made and made in big quantities for Kubota for quite a long time. Both had a lot of money spent on the patent. The mower mower got nowhere, so that's self-explanatory. Never covered its cost. The other patent on the mulching mower, a dear friend of ours, Alfred Tutschke in Germany, had the patent for the mulching blade. He spent a lot of his family money on it, probably £250,000, I would think. And we were the only people that ever paid him any money for the use of his patent. So that didn't go very well, although, we tried hard. The problem is, I think it's encapsulated by the Matbro brothers, or Matthews brothers. They had a patent on the articulated wheel loader. So Caterpillar paid them royalties on it. That was fine. Volvo built some machines like that, but didn't put them on the market until the day that the patent ran out. But because Caterpillar were paying, the brothers went off to Case, because Case started making wheel loaders with the engine in the middle. And said to Case, well, Caterpillar are paying for our patent, please divvy up. And Case said, well, we're not going to. If you want to, you can sue us. And of course, the problem with a patent is if the guy that wants to build it has gotten enough money, you can't afford to sue him. And if he hasn't got any money, there's no point in suing him. So I'm very jaundiced about patents, particularly since if I could sing and compose a song, I could get copyright on a song for nothing. So it doesn't make any sense to me. I do appreciate, of course, that people like Mr. Dyson and so on have made a fortune out of, and even the Knight family have made a lot of money out of their patents. Unfortunately, they've been dealing with an honourable company that's paid the royalties. But anyway, there you are.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, thank you, Alan. Paul Miller, you've got a question there?
Richard, given that yours is a relatively small company, how do you decide what things you're going to play with, where you're going to invest your money? And how do you decide where there's a market for it?
Well, I don't think market research has ever featured really in our efforts at all. It's as much sort of licking your fingers, sticking up in the air and thinking, oh yeah, I think we can probably do it. Examples are, for instance, when we took on the cricket roller business from THY, because it came with somebody who turned out to be a very good and useful works manager, we thought probably it was a good punt, and it still continues because we still make cricket rollers. So that wasn't, I think some people in the company thought I was mad, but anyway, we got over that. Similarly, we now make a lot of screw anchors, and the decision to do that was, well, it seems as though we could make them, they shouldn't be too difficult. And what we were particularly concerned with was that we started out actually buying them from America because we wanted to be making the kit that put them in the ground. So if we want to keep making installation equipment, we need to be sure that the anchor supply is stable. So we better start making them. So it's sort of chicken and egg situation where we had both in our hands at the same time. Hitches obviously came from a demand right from square one. And I mean, at one stage, I was flirting with Ford. Is that the right expression? I'm not sure. But there was a competition between us and Sauerman to supply the hitches for a new range of Ford tractors back in the day. And our original auto guide prototype was, well, there was a competition. There were 4 or 5 different designs, and it got down to us and Sauerman. But we'd obviously got no manufacturing capacity of the sort that would be necessary to meet their requirements. So the thought was they might find a UK manufacturer who took on our design, but then didn't think they could. And we did supply them for their compact tractors, but never got the big tractor business. So I think it's all a bit guesswork is the only expression I can use that covers it.
Yes, in which case you've been quite good at guessing.
Well, I think if we hadn't gone down so many blind alleys, I would be much richer. But if you take, for instance, the mowers that we did for Kubota, well, particularly Kubota, but we also designed to fit everything because we were making them going on so many different things. They were more expensive than a single manufacturer's version would be, because they could weld them all together, whereas we had to make them we had to bolt bits on and so on to make them fit different things. So we were always going to be more expensive. So we've had quite a lot of projects that have run into brick walls sooner or later.
Thanks.
Richard, I have a question, if I may, through the chairman.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Steve, I'm unable to operate these Zoom things very well. So, Richard, thank you very much for absolutely fascinating presentation. It's a number of things struck me. The first thing, besides the products and the good ones and the ones not so good, was that you've given credit to others that have helped you all the way through. This is the sign of a true professional person. Really enjoy that. And also the fact you return the good advice and encouragement that you were given when you were younger, now through Douglas Bomford Trust and the institution. And I commend you for that. The other point that struck me were the anecdotes that you have regarding, the fact, as already mentioned, the foundry and the roof slates, etc. I have an anecdote for you, which for a short while, Richard very kindly took me on as a refugee from the British education system. And so it was during the time of Frank Moore and his wonderful mower. And I recall coming back from a demonstration somewhere in the south. We were coming through Melksham, I think it was. I was driving this, I can't even remember what the vehicle was, but I remember what was on the back. And this was a trailer. It looked rather like a homemade trailer, but I wasn't sure. A converted caravan chassis, I think. And the mower was on the back. It was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It was rush hour in Melksham or Trowbridge, one of those little market towns. And all of a sudden, the axle slid out the back, pulling the brake cable. The brakes seized. The whole thing stopped in the middle of the road, and there was traffic chaos. And I was just the driver, so I didn't know what the hell to do. So I phoned Richard. And one of the things I've always noted about Richard is his calm manner and response. And I've only ever known Richard when he's calm. I've been lucky enough to get on the wrong side. And so I'd also like to mention that you have a tremendous attitude to work and your employees. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. Are there any I see the time's getting on there. Are there any other questions or comments anybody would like to ask?
Steve, could it's Alan here. Could I just make a comment as well? I'm going to put my Douglas Bomford Trust hat on now. Where would we be without you, Richard? I do applaud you for all the work you do for the trust, and as you have with the IAgrE, with the Young Engineers competition and so on in the past. I think that element of mentoring, as we heard at our summit meeting on Monday with the great and good from the industry, that we're desperate for that, and we need more of you. That's the thing. Just reflecting on what you've told us, there must be a book in this, Richard, all these anecdotes of yours. I think that'd be an interesting read. I'd buy it anyway, so that's one sale. You can got that one up. Okay, thank you anyway.
Okay, thank you.
You're too kind, Alan.
Yes, we should patent Richard, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you, Richard, for a very interesting and thought-provoking session. So I'd like to thank everybody finally for joining us today, and we hope to see you again on the 12th of December for our next lunchtime lecture with Dr. Andy Scarlett from Scarlett Research Limited, who's going to discuss the topic machinery for harvesting and processing cereal straw for thatching. So that should be quite interesting. So that's all, I think. Thank you so much for joining us today, and see you next time. Thank you.